Okay, chess fans, here are 5 chess principles that, although are really well intentioned, don't matter that much. Okay, principle number 1 is don't play hope chess. Now, obviously, there is a type of hope chess which is just ridiculous. So, for example, in this position, bishop's opening, there are some 1.5 million games in the Lee chess database that just go bishop takes f7. For giggles, of course. And we have king takes f7, and white is hoping to get the queen involved and do all kinds of things and try and checkmate their opponent. Now, if you actually open up the Lee chess database, you can see that this position, if we include everyone, has been reached 1.5 million times in the Lee chess database. And at first glance, you'll say, well, white is doing pretty well. 50% win rate, 48% for black. Okay. But of course, if you take out some of the low rated players, and as you climb the rating ladder, and let's include only 2200s and above, you can see that this win percentage drastically drops. We're down to just 43% for players with the white pieces. Now, this type of hope chess is obviously not going to work. However, there are other types of hope chess which are more subtle. And so let's take, for example, something like the Stafford Gambit. So you have e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6, knight takes e5, knight to c6, Stafford Gambit on the board is accepted, knight takes c6, d takes c6. Okay, so if we now go into the Lee chess database again, and it's a opening with many, many traps. So for example, before I go into Lee chess database, I'll show you here, let's say d3, this e4 pawn is hanging, bishop c5, the classic trap is bishop g5, and now we can go ahead and take the queen, and doesn't matter because we have bishop takes f2, king e2, bishop g4, checkmate. Okay, many, many, many traps in the Stafford Gambit. And if we go back to this position here, and we open up the Lee chess database again, you can see here, if we include everyone, let's include everyone, that this position has been reached almost 10 million times. And black is doing really well, 52%. Okay, now let's do what we did before and start excluding lower rated players and just include 2200s and above. Okay, and you can see now the stats even out somewhat. We have 137,000 games in the Lee chess database, where still the game is roughly equal. Okay, what happens if we exclude bullet games? You can see it evens out a little bit more, and now white is doing a little bit better. 48 versus 46% win percentage at the bottom of your screen. However, given that white in this position has a near +2 advantage, I see no statistical evidence really that in kind of online chess, blitz, rapid bullet, this is manifesting into a significant win rate for white. Let me know your thoughts below. Okay, principle 2 is knights before bishops. I never really understood why people say stuff like this. I guess it's to help beginners get their knights moving, which can be a little bit tricky to deal with when you're starting out in chess. However, I think chess is littered with examples where moving your bishops first can be really useful. And so, for example, here is a game that I played on chess.com where my opponent has done the principled thing. They've put 2 pawns in the center. They've developed their knights before their bishops. And it's me with the black pieces doing the unprincipled thing with the bishops out and the knight sleeping. However, if you look at this position carefully, you can see that this knight is pinned and the e4 pawn is hanging. And so white is under a little bit of pressure. And just to show you how easy it is to blunder in this position, my opponent, 1772, does indeed play this move, bishop to d2. Okay, and so classic remove the defender tactic here. Now we have bishop takes c3, bishop takes c3, and of course bishop takes e4 wins the pawn. Okay, by no means wins the game, but you can see here an example of where maybe opening up with your knights is not such a good idea. And so what is a better way to deal with this opening? After e4, b6, d4, okay, principal thing to do, bishop b7. A lot of top players will just play bishop d3, leading with their bishop, not their knight. And now ideas like e6 are met with knight f3, and trying to play bishop b4 is not a good idea because it can be batted away with this move c3. The knight hasn't been committed, and white is ready to castle. Now you might say, well, this is just an obscure example from an obscure opening, but I believe every opening will have situations where leading with your bishops can be very useful. So let's take a more common opening, for example, the internet's beloved Caro-Kann. We have e4, c6, d4, d5, and let's say the exchange variation, let's say the exchange variation is on the board. So we have ed, cd, and in this position, white can actually lead with bishop to d3. I believe this is something that Bobby Fischer used to do. You can go check that out. And the purpose of this move is that one of the things Caro-Kann players want to do is liquidate their light square bishop, but there's nowhere to go. Okay, obviously these squares just hang it. You don't want to put it in front of your own pawn, and it looks strange here on d7 on defending this pawn. So even after, say, something like knight to c6, where you are attacking the d4 pawn, let's say c3, knight f6, getting ready to play bishop g4 anyway, maybe, there are annoying lines where top players play h3, for example. Okay, white is somewhat behind in development here. However, it's a playable line. Black is going to play things like g6, bishop f5. But it's just an example of how leading with your bishop can often be useful. Okay, principle number 3 is castle early. If I had a bit of Bitcoin for every time I castled into problems and got myself checkmated, I would be a very rich man. And so staying with the game from before, my opponent has blundered their e4 pawn by playing bishop to d2. And we have here bishop takes c3, bishop takes e3, bishop takes e4. My opponent comes up with this very threatening move d5, threatening to win the rook on h8. We have the accurate response, knight to f6, takes, bishop d3, bishop takes d3, queen takes d3. And in this position, because it's drummed into me, because we feel like we need to castle in games, I just go ahead and castle. And it must be said that it's dead even according to the engine. So castling is not losing as far as the engine is concerned. It's dead even, despite having a pawn advantage. Okay, but we have to be very careful about what engines say. So just because an engine says it's dead even or knows how to defend in this position doesn't mean it's easy for a human being, especially in a rapid game. And so in this position, my opponent comes up with this very natural response, knight to g5. And here, their idea is very simple. They're going to play bishop takes f6, remove the defender of this h7 square, and then deliver checkmate. Okay, and so what can you do? So in this position, I should have played queen to e7, and now if you have bishop takes f6 anyway, you can play g takes f6, you guard the h7 pawn, and the knight's got to move. I played a very poor move instead, played g6, creating dark squared weaknesses with this monster dark squared bishop that my opponent has on c3. And in this position, my opponent goes for queen to h3, going for mate anyway. We have queen to e7, stopping that. Queen to h6, and I did calculate in this position that queen to g7 is a mistake, because after queen takes g7, king takes g7, my opponent has to follow up knight e4, and the knight is pinned and double attacked. And what this shows is that this is all you really think about when you're castling into problems. Okay, I'm not thinking about making any advancements up the board, I'm just thinking about defending. Instead, I played knight to c6, okay move. And in this position, my opponent castles. And it's at this position that I throw away the game. Okay, so I played in this position, knight to d5. And of course, you guys are doing your tactics puzzles the whole time, guys. And you're screaming at your screen, you're thinking, light squares? How on earth did you reach 1800? How can you play such a rubbish move? Well, I want to get rid of this c3 bishop. It's a monster. But of course, you can't do this. You guessed it. You know the right follow-up for white here. It is, of course, to play rook takes d5. You saw it, I know. And after e takes d5, white has this beautiful, beautiful follow-up, rook to e1. And there's nothing you can really do in this position. The squares available for you, there are no squares available for you to protect mate on h7, and so you have to give up your queen, and, well, it's time to hit the resign button. My opponent thankfully doesn't see this. They play bishop to d4, which is a very weak move, perhaps hoping that they can perform a rook lift. And we have here knight takes d4. They do perform the rook lift with rook takes d4. There's no time for this. We have queen g7 going for liquidation. Rook h4, queen takes h6, rook takes h6, knight f6, and it's my opponent's turn to blunder when they play this move h4, doing your tactics puzzles the whole time. Of course, we're going to shuffle our king up, and the rook here has nowhere to go. Now, I do go on to win this game. How I do that is not relevant, but I go back into that position. We have to learn very early on in chess that castling does not equal king safety. Principle 4 is develop quickly. Now, obviously, we need to develop quickly, make our pieces active. That is how we get an advantage in the game. However, I think that this principle is often conflated with just developing for the sake of it, and I believe leads to millions and millions and millions of repeated positions in the Lichess database, which are just no good. So let me give you a concrete example. After e4, e5, we have, say, knight f3, knight c6. I don't play this stuff. Knight to c3, knight f6, 4 knights game. And if we go into the Lichess database, okay, including all games, we can see that this position has been reached almost 63 million times. Okay. And what's remarkable is that the most popular move is bishop c4. 1 in 3 games, 21, 22 million games go with bishop c4. Now, it must be said that that isn't losing, but it leads to nothing. It goes nowhere, okay? After bishop c4, which I believe people are doing because they have it in their mind that they need to develop quickly, it invites the little tactic, knight takes e4, knight takes e4, and now your opponent has the opportunity to play d5, winning back the material. You can actually save your bishop, bishop to d3, and after takes, bishop takes e4. Okay, let's stress that the game is even. However, you achieved very little by playing bishop to c4. Instead, in this position, you need to play something like d4 and play some kind of Scotch game. And to dial this up to an extreme and showing you how nuanced chess can be, and take an opening that I play, say something like b3. Okay, my opponents often respond with e5. We have bishop b2, knight to c6, c4, following Grandmaster Adibam Baskran's Chessable course, 1b3 on Chessable. We have here, say, for example, knight to f6, excuse me, e3, d5, c takes d5, knight takes d5, a3. Interesting position, playing on the first 3 rows. Fast development, only one piece developed. White is completely fine. Okay, even if black plays in this position, bishop to d6, you can go ahead and play d3. This is his line. And this is going against chess principles here, guys. Right? And obviously something like bishop to f5 is a mistake because of this fork. But if you again go into the Lichess database, what you'll find is that this position has been played some 4,000 times and a pretty healthy win rate for white with 52%. Going to the Masters database, you can see that the top players are playing this. Okay, so 104 games, mostly drawish, but it illustrates a point that, yeah, sure, we need to develop, but we don't develop for the sake of it. Principle number 5 is no early queen moves. Obviously, very well intentioned, discouraging people from playing things like Scholar's Mate. Obviously, if chess was that easy, it wouldn't be a game. The queen is the most valuable piece. It's a horrible defender. If it's got to move, it's got to move. However, we should understand that there are very good early queen moves probably in all openings. And so I'm going to give you some examples. So after d4, what I now play is g6 against everything. And a fight for e5 usually begins. A lot of people at my level are going to play bishop f4, London system stuff, bishop g7. Okay, in this position, let's say e3, d6, knight to f3, knight to d7. Tension is growing here. And in this position, many will play h3. We have e5. Bishop gets an escape square. And here, we're just 6 moves in, or 5 moves in. And a good 6 move for black is to play queen to e7. Okay, the knight's bishop is sleeping. However, this queen move is quite useful. It brings the opposition king into x-ray, but more immediately has a threat. The natural developing move, bishop to d3, is a blunder because it invites the fork e4, which of course you saw. And so you see, it's a nice little example of a menacing positional queen move early on. And this will exist everywhere, guys. Let's take something like the Caro-Kann. We'll go back to that example that I showed you early on. e4, c6, d4, d5. Takes, bishop d3, exchange variation on the board, knight to c6, c3, defending the d4 pawn. And in this position, again, kingside pieces undeveloped, queen c7 is a move. Okay, if you actually go into the Lichess database, okay, and open up the Masters database, you can see that this position has been played over almost 1,600 times. And the point of this, early queen move is to create a problem around the development of this dark squared bishop. Don't really want to put it behind a pawn. Bishop f4 was the ideal position, but it's now taken away, and bishop g5, it's liable to be pushed around. And so you see, you will find in your opening some good early queen moves, and it's important to play them and put your opponent under pressure. Okay, that's it. See you later.